Hi there, let's deal with glaciers again and review a few terms and tidy up a few things about glaciers. Let's talk again about how glaciers actually form. In most instances, glaciers have to form higher up in the mountains or in higher elevations. And usually what happens is snow has to fall and it starts to melt a little bit and create what's called firn, which are tiny ice crystals. And eventually they will compact enough over the weight of all the snow above it to form hard, dense glacial ice. And you need considerable amounts of snow to help pack it down, usually about 30 meters. There are two types of glaciers that we've talked about. So in a definition of a glacier is a mass of ice formed by the recrystallization of snow under its own weight, and the compacted snow becomes what's called firn. Ice and snow in layers is necessary for development. One last requirement, more snow has to be present than melted in the previous year, so snowfall can accumulate. And where do we get glaciers? Well, where there's precipitation, and it's usually in the high polar regions or high elevations in the mountains. So there are two types of glaciers that we've talked about. One is a valley glacier, which is in the mountainous alpine regions, and they're smaller in ice sheets. The length is greater than the width, and it usually covers a small region. And here's an important thing. It usually transforms a V-shaped valley into something called a U-shaped valley. So you can see the distinctive U-shapes throughout where valley glaciers are located. The second kind of glacier is called a continental glacier, and it covers quite a bit of the land, and that's found in our polar regions, Greenland, and of course Antarctica. So here are two examples of continental glaciers, and as you can see, they cover up the land. There's Greenland, and there's Antarctica taken from the bottom of the earth. So once again, ice sheets, continental glaciers, and valley glaciers. And glaciers move. Glaciers must be thick enough, but thanks to gravity, they move down. And as a consequence of valley glaciers moving down a mountain, we get erosion. And this breaks up the rock and carves a V-shaped valley into a U-shaped valley. And there are important terms like horns, cirques, arêtes, hanging valleys, and glacial lakes that we're going to talk about. So here are some of those terms. So what we see here in the picture above is we see a normal unscathed valley, and then through glaciation this valley starts to get carved up and we get important terms. Cirques are bowls of water, mountainous lakes almost. A horn is a three-sided peak, and a arête is a ridge. Here's the main glacier, and so here's what results. And you can see the glacial trough, which is the tilling and the making of a U-shaped valley. Let's keep going then. Again, here's how it happens. Whoops, a little too far, sorry. So again, here's a glacial accumulation of snow here, and as the glacier moves down the mountain due to gravity, it brings along with it certain, it starts to carve out the valley, and we get cracks in the glacier called crevasses, which can be deep. There's the term that we sometimes use on a valley or mountain glacier, And that has to do with it being a treadmill of some sort, or what we call the glacial conveyor belt. And what this really means is as it comes down the valley, the ice carves out the ground below it and starts to spit it up and bring it to the surface, almost like a conveyor belt. And the end result is something called a moraine. A moraine. So as the glacier moves and back and retreats, it leaves behind kind of a wall of glacial till, which is called a moraine. Here's the U-shaped valley carved out by a glacier. We might call this a cirque. That's probably a horn. This would be an arête. There's another arête. This would be a cirque. It's going to melt eventually into a nice lake. Let's talk about continental glaciers. They can also form what we call a moraine. And so the moraine is a large ridge that is the end result of glacial till being deposited. Now, there are several theories that we've talked about in regards to the Ice Age, and it's the Earth going through these Ice Age phases that might lend itself to significant glaciation. And so what this is trying to show you is this is sort of the different eras and then epochs of the history of the Earth. And there's the Cenozoic era, which is what we're in, the Mesozoic, the Paleozoic, and so on. And if we look at the age of the Earth, 65 million years ago, 225 million years ago, and we chart the temperature of the Earth over that time, we start to notice that there's 1, 2, 3, and 4 periods in the history of the Earth where there were what we will call cold periods, which might be deemed the ice ages. And during those times of the ice age, that's when the Earth was covered significantly in glaciers. And so as you can see here, there is a possibility of another ice age forming. Some theorists would argue that that's not the case and that global warming would indicate that the Earth is not actually cooling down but warming up, and that's very debatable. Here's the long stretch that we've had of warm temperatures on the Earth if you take average temperatures over millions of years that we think we know of. So here's another graph that I'd like you to show you in regards to what is going on. And so this is the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and we take these from the core samples, especially in continental glaciers. Core ice samples of the continental glacier can give us an indication of how much CO2 is in there over certain millions of years. And so, as you can see, if we start here, 0 million years ago, that's today in this, and we work backwards, we can see that the Earth has gone through several periods where there's been huge amounts of CO2, but the less the CO2, supposedly, the greater chance that there might be what we call an ice age. Let's look at this clip about glaciers to end our...
Glaciers in the Himalayan and Tibetan highlands are dying. The United Nations estimates that 80% of all glacier ice here will be gone by 2035.
The thing of glaciers, it's water towers. They kind of store the water from the wet season and during wet times, and they disperse it during the dry season and the dry times. And they do that for free. You go down in these valleys, and they're really dry parts of the world, except for the water that's coming from the glaciers and from the higher elevation sites.
For now, the melting glaciers are bringing more water to these slopes. But it's a mixed blessing. More water has attracted more settlers and thrown their environment out of balance.
को चाहिँ जनसङ्ख्या बढ्दै गयो, त्यति पनि विनाश हुँदै